What happens when the system meant to carry out justice breaks down in the most horrific way? These are the most disturbing capital punishment failures. You might think you're ready, but these stories will haunt you forever. Joseph Rudolph Wood III was born in 1958 in Belton, Texas. He was sentenced to capital punishment for taking the lives of his ex-girlfriend, Deborah Dietz, and her father, Eugene Dietz, in 1989. At 1:52 p.m., officials at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence began the process, using a chemical combination of midazolam and hydromorphone, intended to sedate and stop breathing. But something went wrong. Instead of slipping into unconsciousness, Joseph Wood began gasping, loud, strained, snorting breaths that didn't stop. For nearly 2 hours, witnesses counted over 600 gasps before he finally took his last breath at 3:49 p.m. The protocol called for 1 dose of chemicals. Officials ended up giving 15 doses in total. His legal team, watching it unfold, filed an emergency appeal, arguing he was still conscious and clearly suffering. But by the time a ruling came through, Wood was already gone. Wood's final words were,
"God forgive you all."
The issues with this process led to a temporary pause on capital punishment in Arizona. Governor Jan Brewer ordered a review of the state's procedures. The incident added to the debates over the chemical-based procedure and the transparency of the protocols used. The next case played out like a horror movie, but this time it was real. Clayton Darrell Lockett was born in 1975. Clayton Darrell Lockett was sentenced to capital punishment for his role in the 1999 taking the life of 19-year-old Stephanie Nyman, who witnessed him and others forcing their way into a home and harming the people inside. She refused to stay silent, and Lockett received over 2,000 additional years for related charges. On April 29, 2014, Lockett was scheduled for capital punishment by a chemical-based procedure at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Officials used a new, untested chemical combination: midazolam, vecuronium bromide, and potassium chloride. Midazolam was administered at 6:23 p.m. By 6:33, Lockett was declared unconscious. But just 3 minutes later, something went horribly wrong. He began to move, groan, and try to speak. Witnesses described his body convulsing. The procedure was stopped, but Lockett's heart didn't stop until 7:06 p.m. An autopsy revealed the cause. The IV had been inserted improperly, causing the chemicals to seep into surrounding tissue instead of going directly into his bloodstream. Courtney Francisco, a reporter at the scene, said Lockett was still blinking, licking his lips after the process had started, and then began to seize. Edith Scholes, a victim advocate, compared it to a horror movie, saying Lockett kept trying to talk and that the experience left her unable to sleep for days. His final words were,
"No, I'm not. I'm not. No, I'm not."
Lockett declined a special last meal. He was served the standard tray: chicken, fried okra, and a biscuit. So why was an untested method used? A shortage of traditional chemicals pushed Oklahoma to try a new mix, one never used before in the U.S. The fallout was immediate. The case made headlines across the country and around the world, sparking lawsuits and temporarily halting capital punishments in Oklahoma. But the next horrifying scene? It was something else. Pedro Luis Medina was born in 1957 in Cuba. Rafael Medina, who arrived in the U.S. during the 1980 Mariel boat lift and had a documented history of severe mental health issues, was later convicted for taking the life of his neighbor Dorothy James in Orlando and stealing her car, which led to his arrest 4 days later. During his time in pretrial custody, Medina showed severe signs of mental instability. Reports say he even ate his own waste and spoke with people who were no longer alive. Despite these behaviors, he was found competent to stand trial. The jury, by a 10-2 vote, recommended capital punishment, and the judge sentenced him accordingly. On March 25, 1997, Medina underwent capital punishment in Florida using the electrical method. Just seconds in, flames burst from the right side of his headgear and smoke filled the room. Witnesses saw flames nearly a foot high and noticed a strong burning smell. An investigation found that a dry sponge had been placed between a wet sponge and the metal screen. This mistake caused the fire. On top of that, the wrong saline solution was used, making things worse. Ron McAndrew, the warden at the time, later called it a horrifying scene. He said the experience gave him nightmares. Medical experts said Medina lost awareness right away because of a massive reaction in his brain and brainstem. The fire came from the faulty setup, not from him feeling anything for long. The incident led to serious questions about the method and helped push Florida to change how it carries out the process in 2000. Medina's final words were,
"I am still innocent."
For his last meal, he requested Delmonico steak with onion gravy, French fries, salad, black beans and rice, American cheese, butter pecan ice cream with strawberry topping, coconut cream pie, and a Pepsi. After his meal, he reportedly said,
"If I had known the ice cream was going to be so good, I wouldn't have ordered the steak."
The next was one of the most troubling incidents in recent memory. Dennis B. Maguire was born in 1960 in Warren County, Ohio. Dennis Maguire was sentenced to capital punishment for the 1989, taking the life of 22-year-old Joy Stewart, who was 8 months pregnant at the time. Maguire spent more than 19 years waiting for his sentence to be carried out. In 2014, Ohio ran out of pentobarbital, a medication previously used in capital punishment procedures, because manufacturers refused to supply it for that use. As a result, the state used a new, untested combination: midazolam, a sedative, and hydromorphone, and pain reliever. Maguire's attorneys warned that this combination could cause a sensation similar to struggling for air. Before we get into what happened next, feel free to like and subscribe for more stories like this. On January 16, 2014, at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, Maguire began the capital punishment process at 10:27 a.m. After about 4 minutes, he started gasping and making snorting and choking sounds. Witnesses observed that he struggled for air for at least 10 minutes. His stomach reportedly swelled, and he clenched his fists. The entire process lasted more than 25 minutes instead of the usual 8 minutes. The untested combination did not make him lose consciousness quickly. This led to prolonged distress. Maguire's final words were,
"I'd like to say I'm sorry to Joy's family. I'm sorry, I'm sorry."
His final meal included roast beef, fried chicken, a bagel with cream cheese, fried potatoes with onions, potato salad, butter pecan ice cream, and a Coke. The difficulties with this procedure led Ohio to pause capital punishment for over 3 years, and eventually to stop using the midazolam hydromorphone combination. The next individual's final moments were in the hands of an untrained team. What could go wrong? Angel Nieves Diaz was born in 1951 in Puerto Rico. Miguel Angel Diaz was sentenced to capital punishment in 1986 for using a firearm against a club manager during a planned takeover of the Velvet Swing Lounge in Florida. On December 13, 2006, at Florida State Prison, Angel Diaz went through the state's chemical-based process. The fourth needles were placed too deep. Instead of going into Angel Diaz's veins, they pushed through into muscle and soft tissue. This meant the chemicals didn't enter his bloodstream properly. As a result, both of his arms developed large chemical burns. One was 12 by 5 inches, the other 11 by 7 inches. Experts said he would have needed skin grafts if he had survived. Diaz appeared awake for over 20 minutes. Witnesses saw him grimacing, coughing, squinting, and moving his mouth like he was trying to speak. A second round of chemicals was needed before it was over. The governor at the time, Jeb Bush, stopped all scheduled procedures after this. A full review followed. It revealed that the team wasn't properly trained and didn't follow the rules. The review couldn't confirm if Diaz felt pain, but what happened raised serious doubts. Florida later changed its protocol because of this case. His final statement was,
"The state of Florida is taking away an innocent life. The state of Florida is committing a wrong act because I am not guilty. Capital punishment is not only a form of revenge, but also a fearful act by humans. I am sorry for what is happening to me and my family, who have suffered through this."
Diaz declined a special last meal. He was given the standard prison meal that included shredded turkey with taco seasoning, shredded cheese, rice, pinto beans, tortilla shells, apple crisp, and iced tea. The next case should have been routine, but after one agonizing hour, they had to stop everything. Thomas Eugene was born in 1950 in Hamilton, Ohio. His childhood was troubled. His parents often argued, which led to their divorce. He lived with his father until his father died unexpectedly in a way that left questions. This event affected him deeply. Later in life, Creech became a drifter who moved across the country. In 1974, he was arrested after 2 fatal incidents in Idaho involving Edward Thomas Arnold and John Wayne Bradford. He was later found responsible for 5 fatal incidents in several states. While in confinement in 1981, he fatally harmed a fellow inmate, David Dale Jensen, which resulted in his return to a state-administered capital sentence status. During the procedure, the medical team attempted to establish an intravenous IV line 8 times across various limbs, but were unsuccessful. Creech remained conscious throughout, reportedly looking at witnesses and mouthing words. At one point, he stated that his legs hurt. The process was halted after nearly an hour, and Creech was returned to his cell. In response to this incident, Idaho officials announced plans to use central venous lines as a backup method for lethal injections if standard IV access fails. This involves inserting a catheter into deeper veins, such as those in the groin or neck, and requires a higher level of medical expertise. The chamber has been remodeled to accommodate this procedure, allowing witnesses to observe via closed-circuit cameras while maintaining the individual's dignity. Thomas Eugene Creech's second capital punishment attempt was scheduled for November 13, 2024. However, this second attempt was also delayed when a federal judge issued a stay on November 6, 2024, to allow time for legal challenges to be considered. As of April 2025, Creech remains in custody. Another case, another shutdown, but the agony this time, it pushed past the breaking point. Romell Broom was born on June 4, 1956 in Muskegon, Michigan. On September 21, 1984, Broom fatally harmed 14-year-old Trina Middleton in East Cleveland, Ohio. She was returning home from a football game with friends when he forced her into his car. He was stopped shortly after another similar attempt on December 6, 1984. Broom was given the highest penalty. On September 15, 2009, at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, Romell Broom's scheduled lethal injection was halted after over 2 hours of unsuccessful attempts to establish an intravenous IV line. The team made at least 18 needle insertions in various parts of his body, including his arms and legs, but were unable to maintain viable IV access. Broom, in visible distress, tried to assist by moving his arms and flexing his fingers. At one point, he turned onto his back, covered his face with both hands, and sobbed. The procedure was called off when the team concluded they could not proceed safely. After the failed attempt, his legal team argued that trying a second time would violate protections against repeated punishments and methods that cause severe pain. However, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that a second attempt was allowed. The report noted that the initial attempt did not complete the process since the chemicals were never fully administered. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review his case further. Broom remained on state custody until he passed away on December 28, 2020, at the age of 64. John Lewis Evans III was born in 1950 in Beaumont, Texas. After being released on parole in 1976, John Lewis Evans and an accomplice went on a 2-month stretch across several states, taking money and items from multiple businesses by force. In January 1977, they entered a pawn shop in Mobile, Alabama, and used a weapon against the owner, Edward Nassar, in front of his 2 young daughters. Evans later admitted to the act in court and expressed no regret. On April 22, 1983, at Holman Correctional Facility, Evans underwent the state-administered capital punishment process. The chair used for the electrical method in Alabama was nicknamed Yellow Mama due to its distinctive bright yellow color. This color was chosen because the chair was painted with highway-lined paint from the adjacent State Highway Department lab. The chair was built by Ed Mason, a British inmate, in 1927 at Kilby State Prison in Montgomery, Alabama. At 8:30 p.m., a first electrical jolt of 1,900 volts was applied for 30 seconds. Sparks flew, and the leather strap on his left leg burned through, causing the electrode to detach. Doctors noticed that he was still moving slightly. A second jolt was given, which produced flames around his head and smoke from his leg. Even then, he showed signs of life. His attorney asked for clemency on the grounds of severe and unusual pain, but Governor George Wallace did not agree. A third jolt was then applied. After this, Evans passed away at 8:44 p.m. Before the process, he said,
"I have no malice for anyone, no hatred for anyone."
And he smiled before a black veil was placed over his face. The need for 3 jolts came from a malfunction during the first jolt. The initial jolt caused the leather strap on his left leg to burn through and detach the electrode. This malfunction prevented the current from properly passing through his body and required additional jolts to complete the process. Evans arranged his final meal on Thursday afternoon. He chose items available from the prison's kitchen. Alan Lee Davis was born in 1944 in Jacksonville, Florida. Benjamin Tiny Davis was sentenced to capital punishment for causing the loss of life of a pregnant woman and her 2 young daughters during a home invasion in 1982. While he remained in custody for the capital sentence, his health got worse. His weight increased beyond 340 pounds, and he experienced other health problems. The state made modifications to the electric device used in such cases in order to accommodate his size. On July 8, 1999, the state carried out its sentence at Florida State Prison. Witnesses observed that during the process, body fluids began to drip from Alan Lee Davis's nose, flowing down the leather strap over his mouth and soaking the front of his shirt. His chest visibly heaved around 10 times after the electricity was shut off, and his hands clenched tightly, prompting concerns about whether he had fully lost awareness. Officials said this was due to a pre-existing nosebleed and stated that the electric device worked as planned. But critics questioned that explanation, especially given the amount of blood seen. Following this case, Florida replaced the electrical method with an injection-based method. His final meal included a lobster tail, fried potatoes, a half-pound of fried shrimp, 6 ounces of fried clams, half a loaf of garlic bread, and 32 ounces of A&W root beer. His final words were,
"I asked for this myself."
Charles was born in 1940 in Fayetteville, Illinois. James Roy Walker was sentenced to capital punishment for taking the lives of Kevin Paul and Sharon Winker in 1983, after tying them to a tree and taking money from one of them. On September 12, 1990, Charles Walker became the first person facing capital punishment in Illinois in 28 years. The sentence was carried out by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center. However, the procedure did not go as smoothly as intended. A kink in the intravenous, IV tubing, and improper needle placement caused the flow of the lethal chemicals to be impeded. Specifically, the needle was directed towards Walker's fingers instead of his heart, which prolonged the process. Walker took his last breath 11 minutes after the administration of the lethal chemicals began. Walker's last words were,
"Tell Jesse and tell Vi that I will see them later. You're a good man."
For his final meal, he chose fried wild rabbit, biscuits, and blackberry pie.